Aria Langston moved like the wind, present, but never loud enough to draw attention. She didn't walk through the crowded halls of Jefferson High looking for validation or applause. She kept her eyes on the floor, earbuds in, backpack snug, books clutched tightly against her chest. While others chased popularity, Aria chased excellence. Her world revolved around precision, logic, and order. At 17, she was already accepted into MIT's early entry engineering program. She didn't party, didn't post selfies, didn't entertain gossip. The teachers knew her name, but most never really knew her, except one, Ms. Kimball. Ms. Kimball, the school's senior AP English instructor, wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. Her sharpness came dressed in professionalism. Her tone was always neutral, but the undertones never were. She called Aria's name differently, just a tad sharper than others. When Aria raised her hand, she'd often be skipped or redirected. It wasn't obvious enough for others to question, but it happened too often to ignore. Aria noticed it, though she never said anything. The tension began to crack during a Monday class on social justice literature. Ms. Kimball asked for insights on a passage about bias in authority figures. Aria, calm and prepared, offered a point linking historical themes to modern racial disparities. Before she could finish her thought, Ms. Kimball interrupted with a clipped, "That's not what the author intended." She moved on without pause, eyes flicking toward Tyler Greaves, a white football player in the second row. He echoed something similar to what Aria had just said. This time, Ms. Kimball smiled. Later that week, Aria turned in a paper titled The Weight of Silence, an essay about how quiet individuals often carry the heaviest burdens. She had worked on it for days, researching, writing, revising every line with care. When Ms. Kimball returned it, a bold red F screamed from the corner, accompanied by a single line, "Plagiarized. See me." Her hands shook as she stared at the paper. Around her, students whispered. One even stifled a laugh. She hadn't copied a single sentence. Every thought, every word, came from her own experience. Aria stood frozen. She didn't defend herself. She simply gathered her things and left the room. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Her mother, Sloane Langston, had just come back from a week-long assignment in D.C. A decorated federal agent with the Department of Civil Rights Enforcement, Sloane wasn't the emotional type. She didn't fuss or hover. But she noticed. The silence in her daughter's body language was deafening. When she saw the essay on the counter, her brow lifted. Aria didn't say much, just handed it over, eyes heavy. Sloane read the accusation, then turned to her daughter. "Did you plagiarize?" she asked softly. Aria shook her head. "Never." Sloane didn't question her again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm into school the next morning. She simply walked into her home office, closed the door, and started making calls. That night, long after Aria had gone. To bed, Sloane sat at her desk reviewing documents. District grading records, public complaints, faculty reports. She wasn't just Aria's mother now. She was an investigator on a mission. What she found in a few short hours shocked her. The data painted a pattern. Minority students, especially girls, receiving disproportionately lower grades in Kimball's class. Prior accusations quietly dismissed. Parental concerns logged but never addressed. It was all there, buried under layers of bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Aria returned to school the next morning with eyes on her back. Whispers followed her down every hallway. Her classmates didn't say much, but they looked at her differently. Some with sympathy, others with suspicion. By the time Friday arrived, Aria was emotionally exhausted. She sat in the computer lab during lunch, pretending to code, hands idle. Her screen stayed dark for 20 minutes before she realized she hadn't typed a single line. Just as the final bell rang, her phone buzzed with a short message from her mother. "Meeting scheduled. Be ready." Aria didn't reply. She didn't have to. Because for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than anxiety. She felt the storm was finally shifting, and it was coming quietly, but with force. Saturday morning began with a strange calm. Aria stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug she hadn't used. Her eyes followed the sunlight stretching across the tiled counter. Her mother entered the room without announcing herself, dressed in a charcoal blazer, hair tied in a precise knot, eyes unreadable. "Get dressed," Sloane said quietly, slipping a folder into her leather bag. Aria didn't ask questions. She climbed the stairs, changed into clean jeans, a navy sweater, tied her curls into a low puff, and laced her sneakers. She didn't know what her mother had planned, but she trusted it would not be small. They arrived at the district building, downtown, a tall structure with mirrored windows and quiet hallways. The security guard nodded when he saw Sloane, recognizing her badge instantly. They walked with measured pace, heels and sneakers tapping in perfect sync. On the third floor, a conference room waited. Inside sat a school board liaison, an academic compliance officer, and Ms. Kimball. Aria froze for a split second. Ms. Kimball glanced up, stiffened, then looked away. No warm greetings, no smiles. Just silence thick enough to feel. Sloane opened. Her bag retrieved 3 neatly labeled folders and handed one to each official without speaking. Her movements were exact, rehearsed, clinical. She remained standing. "I've reviewed patterns in grading, discipline referrals, and internal complaints linked to this teacher over the last 6 years," she began. "There's a statistically significant discrepancy targeting minority students, specifically high-achieving black girls." No one interrupted. The board liaison shifted uncomfortably. "My daughter was accused of academic dishonesty without a conference, evidence, or a secondary evaluation," she continued. "Her essay wasn't cross-checked with any source. It was simply labeled stolen," Ms. Kimball interjected. "I had my reasons." Sloane raised a single hand, not aggressively, but with an authority that paused the room. "You had assumptions," she replied evenly. "Not reasons." The academic officer opened the folder, flipping through spreadsheets, printed emails, and official complaints. Silence lingered as the pages turned. Sloane stepped closer to the table, her voice steady. "I'm not here seeking revenge. I'm asking if this district values fairness, or if its content allowing quiet discrimination to poison its classrooms." Aria hadn't spoken once. She sat beside her mother, back straight, hands clasped on her lap. She watched Ms. Kimball's eyes dart back and forth, face tightening with restrained irritation. The meeting adjourned without dramatic outbursts. The officials promised an internal review. Ms. Kimball left first, barely acknowledging Aria on the way out. As they stepped outside, the cold breeze cut through Aria's jacket. Her mother walked beside her without speaking. Finally, Aria whispered, "Thank you." Sloane glanced at her, expression unreadable. "This isn't over." She was right. By Tuesday, a notice appeared on the staff bulletin board. Ms. Kimball had been placed on administrative leave. Rumors spread quickly. Students whispered in hallways, teachers paused mid-lecture, wondering who would be next. Rayazivi avoided the noise. She kept her head down, moved through the day like a ghost. During lunch, she sat alone in the media center. The librarian approached quietly, slid a hot chocolate across the table, and returned to her desk without a word. Later, that evening, Sloane made another quiet move. She contacted a friend at the local paper, a former civil rights journalist who now wrote education pieces. She sent her copies of the data, the accusations, the meeting summary. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She just shared the truth. By TV, Thursday morning, the article dropped online. Model student faces baseless accusation at Jefferson High. The headline read. It included Aria's story, her academic record, the accusation, the teacher's sudden leave. Her face wasn't shown, but everyone knew who it was. Screens lit up around campus. Students read silently in clusters. A few teachers pulled the article up during planning periods, scanning the paragraphs with frowns. The article ended with a quote from Sloane. Silence shouldn't be mistaken for submission. Sometimes it's the calm before the truth arrives. Aria didn't speak much that day. She walked through the halls like she always did. Head forward, steps quiet. But something shifted in the way people looked at her. Not with pity. With respect, Tyler Greaves, who once laughed behind his hand, avoided eye contact. His group of friends, once loud and mocking, now sat quieter at lunch. No one said her name, but they didn't have to. The following week, Aria was invited to meet with the school counselor and the interim department head. They asked if she wanted to revise her grade, resubmit the essay, or move to another class. Aria listened carefully, then said, I don't want special treatment. I want what's fair. The counselor smiled faintly. You'll get that, from now on. That evening, as Sloane stirred pasta on the stove, Aria placed a new copy of her essay on the counter. This time, printed cleanly with a gold seal from the district office stamped on the corner. Validated and accepted. Sloane didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Aria stood beside her, watching the water boil, feeling a strange but welcome peace settle inside her chest. Not victory, not revenge, just justice. And that was enough. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Aria had ever experienced. Attention had never been her intention, but now her name floated in every hallway conversation, tucked behind glances, murmurs, and half-finished sentences. Some students offered quiet nods when she passed. Others gave her space, uncertain how to approach someone who'd become more than just another face in the crowd. Though Ms. Kimball's absence left a strange silence in room 308, the substitute, Mr. Vasquez, brought warmth with him. He treated everyone equally, called on Aria without hesitation, and thanked her for thoughtful insights. It felt unfamiliar, being seen without being scrutinized. Outside of class, a few girls approached her in the library. They didn't ask about the article. Instead, one leaned in and whispered, I'm glad you said something. I always thought it was just me. Her words settled deep in Aria's chest like a quiet kind of validation. Another girl, younger, with braces and nervous hands, followed her after tutoring. Ms. Kimball once told me my writing wasn't academic enough. I stopped trying after that. Aria paused, then asked gently, Do you still write? The girl nodded slowly. Aria handed her a notebook from her bag. Then don't. Stop. The local news station picked up the newspaper's article. A short segment aired one evening, voiceover, blurred photo, quotes from school officials. They didn't mention names, but the story had already grown roots. Community leaders began asking questions. Parents wrote emails. The school board announced an upcoming forum to address bias in education. Sloane didn't push Aria to attend, but when the invitation came for her to speak at a regional youth summit on educational equity, Aria surprised even herself by saying yes. The event took place in a downtown auditorium, a space filled with teenagers from schools across the district. Folding chairs, low lighting, scattered backpacks. Nothing fancy. Just students ready to listen. And maybe speak. When Arya took the stage, her hands trembled for half a second. Then she remembered the girl with braces. The girl who stopped writing. The classmates who had gone silent for years. And her mother, standing in the back, unreadable but present. She didn't give a fiery speech. She didn't raise her voice. She simply shared her story. What it felt like to be told your words didn't belong to you. What it meant to sit in a room and feel invisible even when you did everything right. How easy it was to lose faith in fairness, and how rare it felt when someone believed you without demanding proof. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," she said near the end. "But maybe quiet people need symbols too." Her words didn't bring thunderous applause. Instead, they left the room still, deep, attentive, respectful stillness. When she stepped down, someone in the third row whispered, "She said exactly what I've been thinking." Later that evening, a short video clip of her speech surfaced online. A local youth blog shared it, captioned, "Quiet Girl, Loud Truth." The views climbed slowly at first, then faster. Comments filled with encouragement. Former students shared their own stories under the post. Arya didn't seek out the attention. She simply returned to her routine. Classes, tutoring, reading in the back corner of the library. But her presence had changed. Students now leaned in when she spoke. Teachers called on her more often. Even the principal stopped her in the hall one day and said, "You've made us reflect, Arya. Thank you." At home, Sloane watched from a distance. She didn't offer praise or reminders. She simply cooked dinner, kept the lights on, and checked the locks every night. Her way of showing pride came in protection, not words. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived from the district office. It wasn't a warning or report. It was an invitation. They wanted Arya to help co-found a student advisory board focused on fairness and representation. They asked her to recommend peers, to help guide policies, to lead. She read the letter twice, then a third time. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her journal. The following day, she returned to class and found a new student seated beside her. His name was Malik. Soft voice, sharp mind. He leaned over and said, "My cousin sent me your speech. I transferred from Fairmount Prep." Arya smiled. Not a big one, just enough. Weeks turned to months. Ms. Kimball never returned. Her resignation was quietly accepted. The board passed a new policy mandating cultural awareness training for faculty. Anonymous feedback forms were placed in every classroom. Arya didn't gloat. She didn't remind anyone of what happened. She didn't need to. The change spoke for itself. During the final week of the semester, Arya walked through the school courtyard, the same place where she'd once felt small. She sat beneath an old oak tree and opened her notebook. The one she'd given the younger girl had been replaced with a new one. She flipped to a blank page and began writing again. This time, it wasn't for a grade. It wasn't for approval. It was for herself. For all the moments she'd kept quiet. For the truths that deserved to breathe. The ink flowed easily. No hesitation. No fear. She had found her voice, and she wasn't giving it back. The day of graduation arrived under a sky streaked with pale gold. Jefferson High's football field had been transformed with rows of white chairs, a temporary stage, and flags, fluttering in the breeze. Parents filled the bleachers, squinting into the sunlight, holding up phones and homemade signs. Arya stood near the back of the line, cap straight, gown zipped, tassel untouched. Her fingers held her speech, folded and reread so many times it had creases like a road map. She could hear the buzz of chatter, the laughter, the squeak of sneakers on the turf. But inside her chest, everything was still. When her name was announced, as valedictorian, the applause wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. She walked with quiet grace to the podium, adjusted the mic, and unfolded her speech with care. I used to think the only way to survive here was to stay unnoticed, she began, voice calm but clear. Blend in, do well, avoid attention. I thought silence would protect me. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. But silence isn't safety. It's just delay. And sometimes it lets harm slip through unnoticed. A few heads turned. A few teachers lowered their gaze. This year taught me that using your voice doesn't mean shouting. It means standing when your knees shake. It means trusting the truth even when it scares you. A breeze lifted the edges of her gown. To everyone who ever felt ignored, overlooked, misunderstood, you're not invisible. You never were. Speak, even if it trembles, because someone else might be waiting for permission. She ended simply. Thank you. Applause rose, steady and growing. Her classmates stood one by one. Even those who had doubted her clapped without hesitation. Some teachers wiped their eyes. Others looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time. After the ceremony, Arya stepped off the stage, diploma in hand. A younger girl from the mentorship group she had quietly founded ran up, arms flailing, and said breathlessly, "You're the reason I didn't give up." Arya knelt slightly and smiled. "Promise me you'll help someone else, too." "I will," the girl nodded quickly. "I already did." Sloane stood a few feet away, watching with quiet pride. She held no bouquet, no balloons, just a knowing look. When Arya walked over, they didn't hug. Instead, Sloane handed her a single gold pen, engraved with her initials. "You earned it," she said. They drove home in silence, windows down, air warm. Arya leaned her head back against the seat, letting the wind tangle her curls. For the first time in a long while, she felt no weight pressing on her shoulders. Later that summer, she received a letter from the Department of Education. They wanted her input on youth policy design, her perspective on discrimination in academic spaces. They called her a voice of clarity in a noisy world. She didn't feel like an expert, but she agreed. She also wrote a guest column for a national teen magazine. It was called Lessons from the Second Row. She wrote about dignity, the cost of silence, and how small acts of resistance sometimes rewrite entire systems. The piece went viral, shared in classrooms across the country. Her name became attached to more than just a high GPA. She became a symbol of resilience, not by choice, but by necessity. That fall, she packed for MIT. Her room was smaller than expected. Walls. Bare, roommate, quiet. But Arya didn't mind starting over. She unpacked her books, organized her supplies, and taped a small photo above her desk. It was the notebook she had given away, now filled with writing, returned to her by the girl she once encouraged. One evening, while walking across campus, she got a message from someone unexpected. Tyler Greaves. It was short. Just a sentence. "I'm sorry for the way things played out. I was wrong." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she replied, "Thank you for saying that." She didn't need revenge. She didn't crave retribution. She had already won the moment she chose truth over fear. Back home, Jefferson High implemented mandatory bias training. A new reporting system was introduced, allowing students to raise concerns anonymously. The walls that once echoed with silent inequities began to reflect accountability. None of it made headlines, but it mattered. Aria kept writing. Not to relive the past, but to shape the future. She joined a student coalition focused on ethical education, helping design school policy that listened instead of silencing. She still walked softly, still preferred back rows, but now, when she sat down, others noticed and made space beside her. And that, she realized, was the difference. She hadn't changed who she was. She had simply stopped shrinking.